But I feel that we were quite lucky to get this level of work within the very limited budget and purview of the project, so we could put something of substance on the table. Next big subject is Golden Gate tidal power. We undertook and I'm going to ask Mr. Freeling to come up and answer most questions on this, but to undertake a study of some recent surveys that were taken of the tidal resource under the Golden Gate Bridge. We have found significant questions about the latest study by URS that led us to the conclusion that there is really room for more consideration. Particularly, there's a need for physical measurements to be taken under the bridge, which have not yet been taken. Both studies, the EPRI study and the URS study, used mathematical models, not actual physical measurements, to estimate the tidal resource under that bridge. And among the two studies, URS, which appeared to portray the resource as a disappointment, that they placed the basis of their measurement effectively on a substandard location in the channel. So that there are very real and simple reasons for the city to take a second look at the tidal resource. We believe that there are grounds for development of that resource within the economical threshold for that technology, which is somewhere around 10 megawatts of capacity, and that it could prove to be a very valuable resource for the CCA program. Now, just to get into the weeds on this, I think I'll invite Mr. Freeling up. Please.
Robert Freeling, Research Director at Local Power. I wanted to point out on the chart there, which is actually from the URS report, they conducted a very elaborate computer model and to figure out where the maximum resource was. And if you, unfortunately in this picture it's a little bit small, but you'll notice that the lightest portion on the map is just outside of where the bridge is. And they even pointed out that that was the best resource was to the west of the bridge. But the siting that they were recommending for their pilot plant was only 1 megawatt, was to be placed actually a few hundred meters inside the bay where there was actually substantially less resource. Even under the bridge itself, which goes, as you well know, between those 2 points there, that is inferior to where the maximum resource is. And so there was questions about location. And we noticed at every stage it was as though URS was deconstructing the possibility of building a tidal resource. And when there were choices to be made, always chose the lesser assumption. For example, they said there was a choice, a range between 1 and possibly 2 megawatts of mean power that could be developed. They chose a facility that was 1 megawatt. They also located the facility on the inside of the gate instead of the outside where the resource was greater. And I actually produced a list of probably half a dozen of those alternatives where they consistently chose the lesser option. Another example was where they had a model run. They picked a model run of 1 month back around 1980 in their computer simulation. They also ran a simulation for 6 months, and they found that the 6-month simulation actually had 25% more resources, this is all in the report, than the 1 month. And they felt that that was actually a more reliable figure, but they still chose to use the 1-month simulation. So we found a pattern there where it gets reduced from hundreds of megawatts of resource down to 1, and that 1 isn't worth building because 1 megawatt isn't cost effective. If you scale up even to 10 megawatts of capacity, your capacity cost, again, according to the URS report, is reduced by half. If you use CCA low-cost financing, or we looked at also the possibility of zero-interest financing from the federal government. Occasionally they issue the rights of local governments to do that. The cost could be brought way down to a fraction of what URS saw. So we think it's at least worth looking at. There was actually one attempt back in the early 90s by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate Institute. A thesis actually was done where they put Doppler measurements down in the bottom of the gate and found a resource that was actually larger than what URS found. So we think there's some evidence. And in any case, the recommendation not necessarily that it be quote unquote included definitively, but that the option be kept open, we get prepared so that we could take advantage of that if it becomes available. especially if the federal government is offering these zero-interest bonds. There's usually a limited window of getting them. If you're not ready to go, you can't get it. So.
Thank you, Mr. Freeling. If we could go back to the PowerPoint, please. The specific technical issues facing tidal power, the very complex permitting process is the most obvious. Apart from our recommendation of putting in physical three-dimensional measurements of the current under the bridge at the optimal locations, there's a recommendation that the city focus on and initiate a process to evaluate the permitting of a facility out there. It would require both involvement of 19 federal, state, and local agencies, as well as the construction of a power line out to the bridge. So very significant permitting implications for that. But as far as the benefits of the program, a tidal power facility would provide very high quality renewable power, obviously within the city. The CCA program could augment the facility by lowering its capital costs. The assumed benefits of tidal would be enhanced by the fact that it's being used locally and not simply being treated as a grid resource. So we feel that it's certainly worthwhile bringing within the purview of the program and potentially developed as a resource to serve the community.
I have a question. In terms of tidal, as it pertains to entitlement on water rights, who then has jurisdiction? State?
There are, on the bridge, I've got a list of 19 public agencies which would be involved in including the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, Fish and Wildlife, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Then you've got state agencies, BCDC, California Energy Commission, State Lands, Fish and Game, San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board, and Historic Preservation. You've also got the city, the Port Commission, and Marin County. So it's immensely complex. And yet, I know that there's interest also in Marin, and there's a CCA up in Marin, and there's been discussion there of, hey, maybe we could co-develop the resource with San Francisco and share it because we both govern the bridge. And so it certainly is a large project. It's a very complex project, and yet we felt in evaluating it that it's potentially much larger than is assumed based upon what was really, in some ways, a less than ideal configuration of the URS study, and that a new look might very well justify placing this as a candidate for development into the CCA request for proposals. Even if it is a phase 2, it could be a phase 2 element, not a phase 1. It's hard to say at this point, but it's a very high, potentially a very high quality resource, and would greatly enhance reliability in the city and improve the independence of the city.
Chair, I'm sorry, what was your question about, you had a particular question about water permitting? What sort of?
Just jurisdictional control. I mean, I assume it's still within state and federal, but within a certain distance requirement off our own coast. I would also think San Francisco has more influence on that question. Because when the URS study came out, and when we saw a few months ago, maybe a year ago, in the newspaper, the theory was dropping turbines within the water. They would be privately owned by the local utility company, and they would be able to then procure the rights in order to generate the electricity. That was, I thought, some significant assumptions based on the permitting requirements. That's all.
I think if as a starting point, somebody would need FERC authority,
right,
federal authority, BCDC if it's inside the gate in the base part of the coastal zone. BCDC would have Federal Coastal Zone Management Authority jurisdiction, and then you'd have all of these subsequent jurisdictional questions and issues that would come up, but I think those would probably be the two first leads.
Great.
Okay.
All right.